Imagine this for a second. You wake up and you're told you need to immediately shut down your business, lock your doors, and basically just disappear from public view. And the reason? Simply because of where you were born. Well, welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really chilling reality that's unfolding right now for African migrants in Pretoria, South Africa. We're going to look at the data, the reports, and really try to understand how intense economic stress is colliding head-on with deep social frustration, literally forcing thousands of people into hiding.
So, before we get too deep into the weeds, there's a huge question we need to keep in the back of our minds. Is South Africa facing an immigration crisis, or is it dealing with a growing xenophobia problem? Keep that question front and center as we go through today's source material, because your answer to it totally shifts how you view the events on the ground, the motives behind the protests, and honestly, the sheer fear gripping these migrant communities.
All right, Part 1, the threat in Pretoria. Let's look at the immediate catalysts to figure out exactly what is happening in the capital city.
Over the last few days, the capital has been the focal point of some seriously intense, highly organized demonstrations. Hundreds of protesters, mobilized by groups with names like March and March, took to the streets. The reports show these demonstrators chanting, holding signs, and marching straight toward the union buildings, which, is the symbolic seat of executive power in South Africa. And their main demand? They want immediate action against what they're calling illegal immigration. The protesters claim that foreign nationals are taking local jobs, putting a massive strain on public services, and basically worsening the daily economic grind for South African citizens.
And this right here shows you just how incredibly fast political rhetoric can snowball into real-world panic. In direct response to these marches, multiple African communities were given these stark, incredibly urgent warnings. The Ghana High Commission in South Africa literally put out an official advisory telling its citizens to close up their shops, completely avoid public spaces, and keep a super low profile. At the exact same time, the Nigerian Union South Africa told its members, hey, just stay indoors. Now, why such extreme measures? Because historically, protests like this have sometimes tipped over in outright violence, and there's this visceral, undeniable fear among migrants that this latest wave could do the exact same thing.
Which brings us to Part 2, the human toll. We have to zoom in here, because we aren't just talking about abstract political arguments anymore. We're talking about everyday people. For the migrants on the ground, we are looking at a literal struggle for survival. I mean, when people are told to go hide, the economic hit is immediate and it's devastating. Small business owners are forced to shutter their doors for days on end. That means they're losing the day-to-day income they absolutely rely on to buy groceries or pay rent. Everyday workers are essentially paralyzed, totally unable to safely commute. And even beyond that immediate financial hit, folks are reporting direct, terrifying harassment out on the open streets just trying to go about their daily lives. There's a quote from a migrant on the ground that captures this profound fear perfectly. They said, "It's not about whether you're legal or not. Once you're identified as foreign, you're targeted." This is a huge point. Identity, not legal immigration status, has become the sole trigger for harassment. It's no longer about whether you have the right paperwork or visas or documentation. It's simply about being perceived as an outsider. When an accent or your appearance or your nationality becomes a target, an entire community is forced to live in this constant state of hypervigilance. To really grasp why this is happening, we need to zoom out a bit. Part 3, the economic reality. Let's dig into the macro-level drivers and the hard data fueling this massive societal tension. The demographic data here is honestly so revealing. South Africa currently hosts roughly 2.4 million migrants. Now, 2.4 million sounds like a massive number in isolation, right? But put it into perspective, that makes up just under 4% of the total population, compared to 96% South African citizens. Historically, these migrants, who mostly come from neighboring places like Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and Lesotho, they've been drawn to South Africa by the promise of economic opportunity. They've taken on roles in mining, urban jobs, and they've been woven into the country's economic fabric for decades. But you have to contrast that relatively small 4% migrant population with a truly staggering reality, a 33% national unemployment rate. This single number is the key to understanding the intense economic pressure cooker the country is in right now. I mean, there's severe economic hardship across the board. Resources are stretched to the limit, infrastructure is strained, and millions of citizens are out of work, struggling to just make ends meet. When 1 in 3 people literally cannot find a job, the frustration and despair in these communities absolutely reaches a boiling point. And that immense building pressure? Well, that paves the way for groups like Operation Dudula. In an environment with such severe unemployment, migrants are increasingly taking the blame for the country's economic struggles. Groups like Operation Dudula have actually gained significant traction by pushing really strong anti-foreigner narratives. They directly tie the presence of migrants to the lack of local jobs, housing, and public resources. By giving people a highly visible target for what are, honestly, very complex systemic economic failures, these groups manage to channel the public's genuine economic anxiety into localized, organized action against foreign nationals.
All right, part 4, the global reaction. Let's shift gears and look at how both national leadership and the international community are reacting to this escalating situation.
There is a pretty stark contrast between the past and the present here, which is exactly the point President Cyril Ramaphosa brought up during his recent Freedom Day speech. He responded cautiously to the unrest, urging citizens not to let their economic frustrations curdle into hatred. But really importantly, he reminded South Africans of their own history. Back during the dark, oppressive days of apartheid, South Africa actually received massive support, refuge, and solidarity from all across the African continent. His warning is that these rising anti-foreigner narratives today actively threaten to destroy that historic spirit of African solidarity. And the stakes are definitely high enough that this has drawn major international concern. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres firmly condemned the situation on the ground. He described it as, and I quote, violence, intimidation, and incitement to hatred. Language like that strongly indicates just how seriously the international community is taking these developments. It's a clear acknowledgement that what's happening is rapidly moving beyond, peaceful protest and entering the territory of coordinated hostility.
This logically builds to a very stark warning from the UN. It basically boils down to this equation: economic stress plus xenophobia equals instability. The UN is warning that when you take severe economic stress, like that 33% unemployment rate we talked about, and you pour xenophobia and anti-foreigner narratives on top of it, it doesn't just stay a localized protest. It becomes a highly volatile mix. History has shown us time and time again that this specific combination can rapidly spiral out of control, leading to widespread, unpredictable national instability that ultimately hurts everyone, no matter what their nationality is.
So, this brings us to a really crucial question for you to reflect on. We've looked at the protests marching on the union buildings, the chilling warnings from embassies to stay indoors, the undeniable reality of that unemployment data, and the swift international condemnation. So what is really going on here? Is this simply a debate about law enforcement, immigration control, and national policy? Or when you have people who are absolutely terrified to leave their homes, who are forced to board up their shops, and who are told they must literally remain invisible just to stay alive, does it become a severe human crisis? Think about how quickly fear and economic pressure can fracture a society. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll leave you to ponder that until next time.